Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I want to discuss my quarter century F1 grid. So of course, given that calendar just turned over to 2025, I want to kind of make my F1 grid for who I think are the best drivers that we've had over the past 25 years or quarter century. So going back from the 2000 F1 season all the way up to 2024, I'm going to be going over who I think are the best drivers for each of the 10 teams on the current F1 grid. So we won't be looking at teams like Toyota, teams like HRT, factories that are no longer on the grid, but I will basically be doing this on a factory by factory basis. So, for example, for Aston Martin, I'll also be including the results for Jordan and Force India as well. The other rule that I have when I was making this video or making the grid for this video is that every driver can only be used once. So I can't have Alonso be on 3 different teams. I can't have Hamilton be on both McLaren and Mercedes, for example. So that made things a little bit more challenging, obviously. And then the other thing as well, so 2 drivers as well as kind of a reserve driver for honorable mention. And the other thing I'll mention as well, just one last thing before we start. I wanted to, I think, put the 20 best drivers on the grid. And then after that, I kind of dealt with reserve drivers. So you might see a driver who might have had might have had better results than a reserve driver somewhere else at that team. But I felt that I wanted to have that driver in that, top 20 group. So let's get started. And we're going to go in reverse order of in terms of how the youngest team to oldest team, just based on their current name. So starting off with, let's see where we're going to start off. We're going to start off with Racing Bulls. Basically, they've had this name since 2024. I know it was basically RB last year, but the name was officially Racing Bulls starting last year. Of course, that also includes Alpha Tauri, Toro Rosso, and Minardi. And the 2 drivers I've chosen from this factory for my quarter century team are Daniel Ricciardo and Pierre Gasly. Now, for Gasly, of course, won a race for Alpha Tauri, and of course, I think had two other podiums, or one or two other podiums as well at the team. So again, easily most accomplished driver. The other guy who won a race will be showing up later on this video, but definitely for the team that he's kind of most associated with. For Ricciardo, I obviously wanted to have him on the grid, but I think for some of his other teams that he drove for, not again, he wasn't really going to make any of those teams. So I thought, Ricciardo, Gasly, pretty solid lineup. I think for this team, reserve driver that I have is Carlos Sainz, so honorable mention to him. I think, it's pretty much a toss-up between Ricciardo and Sainz for their stints at Toro Rosso. I think the cars that Sainz drove were a little bit better than the ones Ricciardo did, so that's why his results were a little bit better on paper. But that being said, I think Ricciardo had a pretty solid 2-year stint at the team. If you go further back in history, looking at the Minardi guys, a lot of them pay drivers not that good. And I think, again, compared to some of the drivers that were in later, the drivers that Red Bull brought in from their junior team, it's very, very hard for, I think, any of them to really be in this conversation. Now, moving on to the next team, and that is Kick-Sauber, their official name since this last season. Before that, they also had Alfa. They were also known as Alfa Romeo, Sauber, BMW Sauber, and then, of course, Sauber as well. And for this team, I've actually gone with a pair of teammates, 2 drivers who drove for this team in the mid-2000s, and that is Robert Kubica and Nick Heidfeld. Now, I don't necessarily think that these are the 2 most talented drivers who have ever driven for this team, but I do think that it's the combination of the 2 best drivers who've driven for the team who gave those best results. Now, obviously, they also had the best car at the time, but really, I think the only other guys who I really would put in the same conversation as these 2 guys in terms of the results that they gave at this team were guys that either showed up on other teams in this video, or guys like Kimi Räikkönen, who was there kind of like at the end of his career. I guess Bottas as well, you could put an honorable mention to him, but for honorable mention for this team, so reserve driver for Sauber, I've actually decided to go with Kamui Kobayashi, a guy who only got 1 podium for the team, but I thought was a pretty solid driver for them for 3 years. Moving on to the next team, Aston Martin. This, of course, also includes Racing Point, Force India, Spiker, Midland, as well as the Jordan team back in the day. And this one, I think one of the drivers will be a pretty easy guess, and that is, of course, Sergio Perez. Won a race with the team back in 2020. His second last race with the team before, of course, he went to Red Bull. So I think, yeah, pretty easy pick there, picking Perez. I think for the other seat, a couple of interesting options there. I could have put Lance Stroll here, but no, decided not to put Stroll on the team. Instead, I've actually decided to go with Giancarlo Fisichella, a guy who won a race for this team for Jordan and got a podium later when they became Force India at the 2009 Belgian Grand Prix. So a couple interesting drivers there, both of them winning races for the team, or at least for that factory. I think for reserve driver as well, I'm going with Adrian Sutil. It was about pretty close between him and Nico Hulkenberg, but I decided that Hulkenberg was his services were more required at a different team. So there you go. My two drivers were Aston Martin / the Silverstone factory team, Sergio Perez and Giancarlo Fisichella. Now, moving on to Alpine, of course, they've had their current name since 2021, but before that, they were Renault, Lotus, Renault again, and then Benetton. Now, first driver of two, not really a big surprise. That is, of course, Fernando Alonso, won 2 world championships for the team, and of course, won 17 races for the team from 2003 up till 2006. Then came back and drove for them again when they were Alpine from 2021 and 2022, got another podium there. So I think, pretty easy pick for Alpine there. And for Alonso, I could have put him at like 2 different teams. I even probably could have justified putting him at Aston Martin, but I decided to put him at Alpine for this video. The other driver was a bit of a challenge, I must say. Alpine have had between the fact that they've been very up and down in terms of results, they've really only that Alonso era, mid 2000s, was really their best era in terms of results. And as a result, they haven't really been able to attract the best drivers over the years. But for the second seat, I've decided to go with Kimi Räikkönen. Did get delivered 2 race wins for the team when he drove for Lotus, 2 very, very solid seasons. And as a result, I think that kind of pipped out guys like perhaps Fisichella, who again did win a couple races for the team as well, partnering Alonso, and ahead of the guy that I made the reserve driver, which was Jarno Trulli, who won the 2004 Monaco Grand Prix with the team. Now, moving on to Haas. Now, unfortunately for Haas, they do have the shortest history in terms of as the Haas, factory, outfit. So again, they don't really have a lineup that's as strong as some of the other ones. And again, if I was just making an F1 grid of best 20 drivers from 2000 till now, I don't think either of their drivers I've picked would be on it, but that's kind of the way this goes. So the 2 drivers I've picked, Kevin Magnussen and Romain Grosjean, both pretty solid drivers and drove for them for quite a number of years. Grosjean drove from them from their first season, 2016, all the way till 2020, when his F1 career ended with that crash in Bahrain. And for Magnussen, drove for them for between 2017 and 2020, and then again from 2022 to 2024. So very, very long stints for both of them at Haas. And as such, it made it really difficult for me to put anyone ahead of them. Hulkenberg is the guy that I've made the reserve driver. Unfortunately for Hulkenberg, even though he had, I think, a really good 2 years, I think the fact that he was only there 2 years, but Magnussen, Grosjean were there for so long, and the results weren't that much better, I think made it really hard for me to put him over the other 2. So that's why I've gone with kind of the OG Haas lineup of Grosjean and Magnussen. Now, moving on to Mercedes, they of course have been in F1 in their current guise since 2010, but before then they of course were Braun in 2009, Honda from as well, and BAR, British American Racing. Now, one very obvious easy pick for this team is Lewis Hamilton, and of course he was on this. He is on the Mercedes team for this video, having won 84 races for the team and 6 of his 7 World Drivers' Championships. For the other driver, I think it was a bit of a toss-up for me between Nico Rosberg and Jenson Button, but Button does appear later in this video, so it's not like Button's entirely out of this, and that kind of made things a little bit easier. So I put the Silver Wars lineup, Rosberg and Hamilton, 84 wins for Hamilton, like I said, and 23 for Rosberg, and of course the 2016 World Drivers' Championship. He, of course, also won at the team. For reserve driver, I've decided to go with George Russell, 3 race wins for the team. And again, I think a little bit better than either Bottas or Michael Schumacher stand at the team. But I don't think that's really a big question, as we all know where Schumacher's going to end up in this video. Now, moving on to Red Bull, I think probably one of the easiest decisions, for me at least. Of course, for Red Bull, been in the sport since 2005. Before that, the outfit was known as Jaguar. Interesting how you go from one animal to another, but results definitely went kind of the opposite way. Instead of going from a carnivore to a herbivore, they go from a underperforming midfield team to a team that's won 8 drivers' championships. And speaking of those 8 drivers' championships, those are the drivers that I have picked. So Sebastian Vettel, 4-time world champion. Max Verstappen, also 4-time world champion. Very, very easy decision to pick those 2 for this team. And the reserve driver as well, not bad for, I guess, instead of a number 2 driver in this case, not bad for a number 3 driver, and that is Mark Webber with 9 wins at Red Bull. Now, moving on to the 3 last teams in this video, and actually the 3 most historic teams. Now, for Williams, they've been in the sport since 1977, but of course, we're just talking about the quarter century, so we're not going to be going into, Williams' deep past. But we will be going a bit into the past for the 2 drivers I picked for this video, and that is they are Ralf Schumacher and Juan Pablo Montoya. So for Schumacher, won 6 races for Williams in the early 2000s, and for Montoya, won 4 races as well. And those were outside of Pastor Maldonado's one miracle win, I guess you can call it, at the 2012 Spanish Grand Prix. That is the only win. Those are really the last wins for the Williams team. So again, a little bit of an easy decision. And again, even if you gave them equal cars, I would say I would rate both Schumacher and Montoya a little bit ahead of Bottas, who is the reserve driver for Williams in this case. Now, moving on to our final 2 teams. Next up is McLaren, of course, been in the sport since 1966. And their 2 drivers I've gone with are Jenson Button. Won 8 races for the team. Of course, I think a bit more better known for his time at BAR Honda, and for, of course, winning the championship for Braun. But I've kind of fit him on the grid by putting him at McLaren, and I have him joining Lando Norris. Now, you may argue a little bit of recency bias with Norris. Only has 4 wins compared to David Coulthard's 7 from the early part of the century, but almost equal in terms of number of podiums. So I do think as well, Coulthard had slightly better cars, and I think, on balance, I would say Norris is probably the slightly better driver of the 2. So there you go. That is my driver lineup for McLaren. Now, finishing off with Ferrari, of course, the oldest, most historic team in F1. They've been in the sport since its inception in 1950. Now, first driver, don't think there's any doubt whatsoever who this is going to be, and that is, of course, Michael Schumacher. I was going to say 72 wins for, I think that's a 72, but it turns out a lot of those wins were in the 90s, so not relevant for this video, but he does have 54 wins this century for Ferrari. Again, the most by any Ferrari driver over that time period. Now, for the second driver, this was a bit of a tough one, and I ended up going with Charles Leclerc. Perhaps a little bit of recency bias there as well. 8 wins for the team, and reserve driver, I've gone with Felipe Massa, 11 wins at the team. So again, Massa has more wins than Leclerc, but I do think, especially for Massa's first stint at the team, the cars were definitely better. Whereas for the second stint, cars definitely good. Alonso was able to compete for drivers' championships 2 of those 4 years post-accident. But for Leclerc, he's never really had a proper title fight. So the fact that he has as many wins as he does, as many podiums, I think he already has 40 plus podiums, and plus, his numerous pole positions as well. I think, pretty easy choice to put Leclerc over Massa for me. So there you go. There is my quarter century F1 grid, split by all the teams. I guess I could have added a couple more teams as well, coming some of the factories. So again, that would be, an interesting one to look at. Who would make the HRT? Who would make the Toyota, quarter century team. Not a whole lot of years to go on for some of those smaller teams, but still interesting nonetheless. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching. And again, who would you choose on your quarter century F1 grid? Are there any drivers here that you would substitute out? Any that you would switch teams around? Again, some of the decisions might not have been the most logical in terms of which team you would associate with which driver, but I wanted to make sure I got all the drivers I wanted in that top 20 as much as possible. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.